So far, you've learned a lot about different ways that we study disease. You've learned about model organisms. You've learned about how we can look at DNA to try and figure out maybe what's going on inside the genetics. But it's not always that easy to study organisms, because sometimes we don't even know what to look for. We don't know what to look for in genetics. We don't know what to try and model inside of a mouse or inside of yeast. There are a lot of challenges of doing that. And so when we don't know what to even look for, one of the things we have to do is we have to turn to computer models. Now, computer models are convenient because, sort of like model organisms, computer models are exactly that, a model of what we're doing. They allow us to take something that is normally too complicated to study and instead condense it down and try and get it at a form that we can play around with and maybe learn something about that way. So, computer models consist of primarily 4 different parts. Our first part is about clinical disease that we're studying. So, as an example, I'm going to lead you through how we might study schizophrenia. So, you probably know something about schizophrenia. The most common thing that people associate with schizophrenia are hallucinations. But there are other things associated with it as well, such as delusions, which are when people can't tell sort of what is real and what is not real. People lots of times will have reduced emotional expression when they have schizophrenia. They also will sometimes try to associate different topics that don't really associate with each other. So for instance, in a single sentence, they might switch topics 3 or 4 different times. And they also experience something referred to as psychomotor difficulties. Psychomotor difficulties, that's sort of like if I say, okay, I want to move my hand up, I'm moving my hand up. I want to look to the right, I'm looking to the right. They have trouble mapping that concept of this is what I want to do from this is what I'm actually doing. And what's unique about schizophrenia compared to a lot of other diseases is that schizophrenia is defined by the symptoms. And so if you have these symptoms, you're defined as having schizophrenia, which is unlike other diseases. And we define it that way because we don't know what the underlying cause is. We don't exactly know what causes schizophrenia, and so we can't really define it as some, for instance, trinucleotide repeat. We can't define it as checking the oil level. So that makes schizophrenia a little bit difficult to study, but it also makes it appropriate for building a computer model. So that's one component of a computer model, but that's not enough. A second component of a computer model is information that we incorporate from, for example, animal models. So, for instance, studying different things within the mouse can be extremely useful for building computer models. So this right here is a picture, it's called Brainbow. These are each of these different little blobs that you see is a different neuron inside of the mouse, inside of a mouse brain. And they're colored different colors so that we can see what connects to what and how they're connected and maybe how they talk to each other. So this is an important thing we can incorporate inside of our computer model. We can also incorporate inside of our computer model information about individual neurons because, yeah, we want to know how they behave together, but we also want to know how they behave on their own. How does it behave when it's by itself? How does it send signals? We also want to study individual proteins, and one way we can do that is by using yeast. And so these individual proteins are important, as you learned, for everything that a cell does. One of the most important things a neuron does is communicate with other neurons. Neurons are designed to communicate with each other. And so we can study then the proteins that are used for that communication. And we'll look at an example of that a little bit later on. So computer models consist of knowing something about the disease, consists of model organisms, but it also consists of working with people, working with humans, and trying to understand the disease using humans. Now, I want to just say as a disclaimer that when we do research on humans, there's a lot of ethical approval that we have to go through. We have to, number one, prove that this research will not harm people. And number two, we have to prove that anyone that goes through the research that we're doing has given full consent to exactly what we're doing, and that they are very knowledgeable about everything that will go on. And we, as researchers, have to go before a board and prove this to the board and spend a long time filling out paperwork, on the order of months filling out paperwork to try and do this. So it's a really good protective process to make sure that people are protected when we're doing research that involves people. And so what kind of research do we do involving people? Well, a couple things we can do. So we can talk to the person. We can just ask them, how are you feeling? How are you doing? How do you feel about this? Have you noticed something like this? We can give them a medical examination as well, and have a doctor look at them and see if there are any symptoms. We can also take pictures of people's brains, only our cameras don't look quite like this. Our cameras look a little bit more like this. So, as you might know, this is a MRI machine. Maybe some of you guys have had an MRI before. And what an MRI allows us to do is it allows us to take pictures of inside of people's brains. We can take pictures, and we can also take videos of what's going on inside of people's brains. And finally, another thing that we can do is we can give people medication. This medication can, for a very short period of time, make certain proteins more or less effective. Again, we have to make sure this is very safe before we do this. We have to make sure people completely consent to this. But it's something that can help us understand people's behavior just by looking at proteins and understand that on a protein level. So, lots of different components, 3 different components so far. But the last component that we're missing is the model itself. What assumptions are we going to make about the disease that we're studying to make it such that we can even study it? And so we have to take all of this information that we've learned about. We have to take the studies that we've done with people. We have to take what we've learned from mice. We have to take what we've learned about individual proteins, what we've learned about just from talking to people about their symptoms. We have to take all of this and we have to condense it down into a computer model. And what we do a lot of times is we'll have both a human and a computer model do a particular task. And so I'm going to take you through one of these tasks that we do that's specifically designed to look at one particular protein. And in particular, we want to understand if this protein is somehow involved in schizophrenia. There are a bunch of different ways it can be involved, and so we designed this task to try and probe that. And so whenever this cross is shown, I'm going to take you through an example of this. Whenever this cross is shown on the screen, I want you to always be looking at the cross. And then something else is going to show, this little dot. It's going to show for a brief period of time and then disappear. But even while it's showing, I want you to still be looking at this cross in the middle. And then the cross is going to disappear. And once that happens, I want you to point to wherever the spot was. So here, we would point right there. And there it is. I'll show you how you did. So, are you ready? Here we go. Look at the cross. Okay. Look to see where it was. Did you get it? So, what happens is we gave this to our computer model that we built. And it predicted that for healthy people, they would look somewhere around here, somewhere around where this green is. It also predicted that if we got rid of this protein that we thought might be involved in schizophrenia, it would look more like this. It would be similar location, but more broad. Just to test things out, we tried a different protein, getting rid of a completely different protein to see how that would affect things. And this other protein, we can call that a null hypothesis. This other protein was caused very broad errors. So when we got rid of this protein in the computer, people looked all over the place, or the computer looked all over the place, predicted. what we did is we took this to actual people. And so healthy people looked right around there, exactly what the computer predicted. And similarly, people with schizophrenia looked right around here, almost exactly like the computer predicted as well. We also tried giving people a medication that would temporarily make that one protein not work as well. And again, it looks almost exactly like schizophrenia. So we made a slight modification to something that had never been tested. And so for this one, I'll give you the same task again that you just did, except for this time, I want you to ignore the distraction. There's going to be a distraction in the middle, and I want you to ignore it. Okay? Here we go. Look at the cross. Okay? Where do you think it was? So, we gave this to our computer model to try and make predictions. And our computer model predicted that healthy people would still look right near where the dot was. But the computer also predicted that people with schizophrenia, or people who had damaged versions of this protein, would look more like that. Now, it wasn't for a couple years after the researchers who did this made this prediction that they were able to finally test this in people. And guess what they found? Healthy people looked like this. And people with schizophrenia looked like that. So this is just one way that we can use a computer model to try and understand how schizophrenia, or any disease that's very complicated, too complicated to study in animal models, too complicated to study by its own in yeast, how we can use computer models to get a grasp on what's going on. And just to emphasize, too, that research is a cycle, and so these computer models, too, help studies in yeast, help studies in mouse. They all feed off of each other, and they all help us understand diseases better. And so, just to reiterate, computer models can be very useful when we don't have the tools available to study a very complex disease on its own. Schizophrenia is one such complex disease, and computer models have helped us understand what's going on in schizophrenia. So hopefully by now you've learned a lot about different ways that we study disease, using DNA and RNA, using that instruction manual, using mice, using yeast, and then finally how we can use computer simulations to tie all of these loose ends together. So thank you.